going on, you guys? Welcome back to the Pro Physique Code Prep Podcast. It is a Monday, and today you've got your normal two, myself and Evan, and then we are joined by Mr. Stephen Bogrand. How are you, Stephen?
I feel mustacheless. I don't. I've shaved my mustache and I regret it.
You regret
It's
it?
no. It's a pain, but like I regret seeing myself without it.
Oh,
I need to turn my video off.
oh, God. Well,
Audio only.
oh, yeah, I feel like a lot of people have been watching on YouTube. Because obviously if you're listening, you guys can't see Steven's mustacheless face, but watch us on YouTube if you wanna be able to see that.
They might have not even ever known the glory that was the creepy Steve stash.
The creepy
So
mustache. Oh, I love it. Well, today, you guys, Paul is, I don't know, where's Paul? He's out of town somewhere, right, Steven?
he's in ye old California
Yes.
looking for gold and wine glasses.
Yeah, he's in Napa, right?
I
Napa.
think so.
Yeah, somewhere in California. So he is obviously not joining us today. He's having fun over there. And so that's why we brought Stephen on today. And we're going to talk about just the topic of sweating the small stuff and things in prep specifically that may seem really small, but that actually matter. I think there's two sides to this. There are little details that I think some people, depending on their personality, overfixate on that really don't matter in the grand scheme of things. But today we're going to talk about the opposite side of like little details in prep that actually do matter that maybe you wouldn't think about otherwise. Because, by the nature of prep, it does have to get pretty precise and specific if you want to do well. So that is what we are going to dive right into today.
Hell
Good
yeah.
topic. It's a great topic, just like you said, because a lot of people stress over stuff that honestly really doesn't matter. And I think that's big for the off season too. Like people really stress about things. It's like, come on, now's not the time to stress about that. And there's things that matter and there's things that don't. But then there's other stuff that people really don't think are as big of a deal as they are. So I think it's a really
Absolutely.
good topic.
Especially for people, I think, who are prepping for the first time or they're newer to it. Like, you don't know what you don't know, right? So we'll talk about specifically the little things that really do matter. And this is specifically like in that prep phase. Because like you said, Evan, I mean, I don't know about you guys, but I've had some goals. I've had some clients recently express to me like that their goal in their off-season or improvement season is to have a little bit more flexibility. Because they're those people that are like, a little too uptight with things, and there's a time and a place for that, but in your time away from prep, I think that it's nice to relax a little bit. But we're going to dive into sweating the small stuff in prep. So first and foremost, what's one of the first things that comes to your guys' mind when it comes to maybe like an overlooked variable in prep that can kind of seem small but that actually makes a really big difference to not only the client but as information for us as coaches?
So I'll say for me, I think it goes before you even like start prep is recognizing that being like a competitive bodybuilder, it's kind of an extension of a lot of stuff, right? It's the extension of somebody who's been training a long time and who enjoys it. It's the extension of somebody who probably eats mostly healthy, nutrient-dense foods or who stays in a reasonably lean spot in terms of their lifestyle stuff and regular things. And so, like you kind of touched on a little bit with people talking about having more balance, whatever we want to call it. Um, but understanding that if you've never done any of this stuff before and it's not part of how you see yourself, like it's gonna make prep that much harder because when you see yourself as that person who does those things, like a lot of those small things are already in check. So it's like a small thing in the idea of it's kind of like how you see yourself, and it's a culmination of a lot of small things you should already be doing if you want to be successful there. But it's such a big thing in terms of like whether or not you're actually going into the prep into a successful place. So before you even get there, like actually seeing yourself as a bodybuilder or as a fitness person and like that semblance of identity, I think it's something nobody really talks about or a lot of people don't talk about, but it becomes so important because it means that you're no longer having to put as much effort into every single little thing. Which means you get to be more detailed oriented on the next thing and the next thing as now, you're actually getting into the prep and getting ready for stage.
Mhm.
That's a great point, and like something I want to bring up really quickly. I talked about this earlier this week in a video I did, or like a YouTube video I put out, but I like kind of extending on what you said, Stephen. I personally believe if you want to be a good competitor, if you want to have a successful prep, like you should be living the lifestyle before you start prep. And I think sometimes people have this like false perception and they think prep is almost like the next fad diet, right? Like, oh, I don't like the way I look, or oh, I want to drop a lot of weight. I'm going to start a prep. I'm going to pick out a bodybuilding show and prep so I can get myself into shape. And more oftentimes than not, people that do that typically don't have a successful prep or don't enjoy the process. So I think establishing that identity beforehand and realizing that really a bodybuilding prep or competition is, like you said, Stephen, it's an extension of already being an athlete. Like, you can kind of look at it as, okay, you're already an athlete, you're already going to the gym, tracking your food, or fulfilling a certain diet. It's kind of just an extension of that, and it's a way to take it to the next level. Like, if you are already doing that and you are just like, hey, I want another challenge, I kind of want to level up a little bit, like, it's an extension of that. It's not a, oh, I've never tracked my food, I've never gone to the gym consistently, I want to drop 20 pounds. So I'm going to pick out a show and prep for a bodybuilding show as a means to drop those 20 pounds. Like, that is, to me, that is not what it's about.
That's really actually interesting because I never really thought about that, Stephen, before you said that. But my first inclination was, well, that's the reason I did my first show was to get in shape. Like, that's the whole reason. It's because I couldn't stick to a diet. And I figured if I told somebody that I was going to do a show, yeah, I would either stick to it and do it, or I would be a quitter. And I refuse to be a quitter. But piggybacking off that, that's also not the case because I've been lifting weights and training consistently and hard for 15 years up until that point. The diet and stuff, I thought I knew what I was doing. God knows I didn't now, but I swore I did at the time. But I didn't go in completely blind. So I never really thought about that side of it before, but I did have a lot of the pieces in play before I actually did prep. But my reason behind it was probably not, the most optimal, I guess. But hey, I'm still here. So
Well, I think that's part of also, like, I mean, I think back to the first time I competed too. And I think that's kind of also what makes us all like great coaches, because we've learned from our past, like, I don't want to say mistakes, but like, we've done things maybe in an unideal situation in our past. So we've learned from it. We can now teach our clients, what not to do, or what's, not most favorable. So yeah.
Yeah, and
yeah.
I think there's also this idea that like optimal exists. Like we try and get as optimal or as close to optimal as possible with what we do, right? But it's never truly a thing. I think for me, the main thing would be like you had a lot of those things. Like
Mhm.
you were still a collegiate athlete. You still had a lot of weight training. You still had the muscle. You still had all these things, right? Um, like it'd be very different from like if I was, we'll say, I didn't really start lifting until I was 24. If I
Mhm.
was 18, I had never really lifted weights. I had never really dieted. I never thought about activity. I wasn't into sports. I didn't do any of that stuff. I just played video games, Like, oof, like
Oh,
that's gonna be
geez.
tough, right? You can probably manage some of those really
Yeah.
big changes with like the goal, the carrot on the stick, and like that can bring some of that stability, consistency, whatever we want to call it. But like if you're trying to change everything about who you are all at once, like I don't know, and not for me, dog.
Yeah,
It,
that's
it, I think that really brings in another point with it too, is I think a lot of people overlook when they're getting into a prep is stress with that. And if you're changing everything about your life at once, just like you said, Stephen, talk about a lot of stress, not just physical stress, but mental stress. The first time you kind of get into this, especially if you haven't really tracked macros or prepped meal before, or say you're on a meal plan, you haven't, been doing this before, you work a full-time job, it's like drinking from a fire hose. It's a lot of stuff right up front if you don't know anything. I can't imagine that. And that's going to create a ton of stress. There's enough stress for people that have competed before and they understand just prepping itself brings its own lot of stress. But if you try to start from complete square one and just hop into prep, oh man, yeah, that's gonna be really tough.
Yeah, that's like what I'm sure you guys are the same, but like one of my prerequisites, so to say, with clients is like you should already know how to track your macros. Going to the gym should not be an issue. Like, all those little fundamental variables that you're going to carry over into prep should honestly already be established. That way, it's like you're starting prep and nothing really changes besides the fact of, okay, well, now we have this potential show date and we're now just slowly decreasing macros, slowly upping cardio. Like, that's really the only kind of transition you should go through when you're starting a prep, if you want to make it, you
Mhm.
know, if you want to put the least amount of stress on yourself. But I think something to kind of dive right into right off the get go is something that I mean, it could be considered us small. It could also be big, I guess, the way you look at it. But I think one of the things that is can sometimes be overlooked in a prep, and what's very important is that stress management and being able to manage your stress. In fact, I have some girls who I work with, and I know they want to compete, but they're always like they're chronically stressed. And I've said, we need to work on that stress management component, not only from a physical standpoint, but from a cognitive standpoint, like how you perceive stress before we go into a prep, right? Because if you're somebody who does not know how to control your stress, you may be able to get by like the first half of prep, but especially when you get deep into that prep and your body is fighting you, that's when you're really going to notice some of those issues arise.
Yeah, I always like to say prep never makes things better. It might make you leaner, but it doesn't actually make anything better. And it's kind of like you said, like the mental stressors are a thing. Your body doesn't actually tell the difference very well between like a mental or and a physical stressor, right? So we know that going to the gym is a stressor, right? So we're going to be going to the gym during prep. We know that cardio is going to go up during prep. That's going to be a stressor. Like if you have kids, like they're a wonderful stressor, but they're a stressor, right? So you're still going to have all the other stuff. If you're going into prep and you know that your show is going to be in your busy season at work where they normally want you working 50, 60 hours a week, that's something to think about. So like understanding that stress, even, and it's this weird thing because not all of us perceive stress the same way, but just because you might not perceive yourself to be super stressed, I've had a lot of very, very successful people that I've worked with who have very low perception of stress, but they're still crazy high stress. And so even if you don't realize necessarily that it affects you, it still affects you. So if it's affecting you in your off season or what even in the beginning of that dieting phase and that prep, it's only going to get worse if you don't learn how to curtail it and actually sit back and do some meditation or some breathing exercises or to take some of your cardio outside and get green exercise when the weather's nice. Whatever stress management, get that many petties, dog. Do what works for you, right? But it's definitely I don't I think everybody understands the importance of it, but because it's so like it's not a simple fix for most people, right? It's my job. I can't quit my job. It's my kids. It's this. It's that. It's like, okay, cool. Well, that's not simple, but it doesn't mean we can't still improve it and make it better. And I think that's why so many people are like, yeah, it's just a small thing, but it's this culmination of small things that gives you a huge impact over time.
And it's really hard to, I think part of why people kind of ignore it is because they know it's hard. Like if you are naturally, I am one of them, like a very kind of high strong type A person, it's hard to manage your stress. Like you don't want to come to terms with like how much stress you actually hold and what you need to work on, right? Because it's hard. It's not just like an overnight fix. It's not just take this supplement and it's going to fix all, right? Of course, there are great supplements that can kind of help with stress, but like that's not going to do all the work for you, right? So I think why a lot of people ignore stress is one, they don't want to admit that it's a problem, right? And I think sometimes people don't even realize it's a problem because they normalize that feeling, right? But it's just hard. It's hard. It's not something that you're going to master overnight. Heck, I'm still working on it. I mean, I've gotten a lot better over the past year, but like you said, Stephen, like breath work, meditating, like I've never been somebody that's been into that stuff. I haven't, but when you realize it can really help to bring your body out of that fight or flight mode, you realize, the importance of it. But it's a hard thing to establish that good kind of stress. So I think that's why a lot of people just don't pay attention to it because they know it's hard to fix if you are somebody who's just normalized that feeling for so long.
And we also always go back to our baseline of what we know. And for chronically stressed people, like most type A people are, which are honestly the type of people that are mostly attracted to bodybuilding, you're chronically stressed because you put it on yourself. And you always, even if it's like, it's not right and it's abusive and it's like good for yourself, you always go back to what you know. That's just the way people are. It's just how we're built. Of course, we could break that chain, but it's not the easiest thing. It takes conscious effort and conscious work, just like everything, just like going to the gym and training. And just because you eat good one day and train good one day doesn't mean it's going to change anything. You got to do it day after day after day after day after day to build that. It's the same thing with learning how to manage your stress and mental health and the whole nine yards with that.
Yes.
Yeah. And I think that within that, like we talk about type A and people that kind of feed off that like high stress, high drama, high difficulty stuff, like it also can mean that we might be making a lot of things harder than they need to be.
Yep.
And we could probably simplify a lot of things to decrease that amount of stress. It's like you said though, like I like to kind of almost equate it to like my old relationships. I would get into relationships with women that weren't ready for relationships. They had, huge red flags. And I was like, cool. This seems like this is what I'm used to, right? It feels comfortable. It doesn't feel right, obviously, but it feels comfortable. So I'm going to keep going back to that comfort of what I'm familiar with. And it's like, all right, well, maybe I need to forego some of that comfort of what I'm familiar with because I'm actually making it more difficult on myself. And if I
Mhm.
do something to push myself into this place where I'm a little bit less comfortable with maybe what I'm doing, which maybe feels like pushing less or feels like doing less, I might actually get better response and results. And lo and behold, now I'm freaking married, right?
With that.
Mhm. That's a good analogy.
It is, and I think I like the quote or the term "comfort equals complacency." And and saying the same is okay, obviously, in certain seasons of life. But if you're looking for good change, you have to realize a little bit of that temporary. I think that's the key word. A little bit of that temporary push and discomfort is really key there.
No, absolutely. I think another one that really just kind of popped in my head, and this is because of a situation I ran into kind of recently with it. If you're going to start a prep, I highly recommend going to a commercial gym or having a full gym. It's very hard to prep if you have dumbbells only at a home gym. It's hard.
Yeah,
It
that's a
is.
good point. I think as much as sometimes, like as a coach, I want to be able to say, yeah, you can use your, home gym equipment. It's like, you're right, Evan, unless you have like a full on, equipped home gym, it's really hard. And I don't know about you guys, but I feel like in prep, I feed off of the energy at my gym. Like I
Mhm.
could never work out at home because I mean, when you get deep into prep and you are just zombie mode, like going to the gym and actually just being around that energy really does help. Whereas if I'm just at home working out by myself, like there's gonna be no like you really give there. So
I'll tell you this, Lexi. Stevie,
yeah,
you're kind of the middle of mine and Lexi's age here. I think that's an age thing
is it?
because later on in prep, I don't want to be around nobody. I want an empty gym. Every once in a while, yeah, but normally, I don't want to be away from people.
That's funny. I
I don't
could
know.
see I could see both ends of that. Like, personally, there are some days in prep where, yeah, I will love to go to the gym, but, like, I don't wanna talk to people, I'm just not in a mood.
Yeah.
But I just find, like, the times I have even just worked out at my apartment gym, it's just
Hmm.
I'm a big atmosphere person. I think some
I can
people
feel that. Yeah.
yeah, and there's been times I'll go to my apartment gym. For cardio, it's fine, but it's like, if I'm really wanting to get in a good lift, it's just like, I'm just not feeling it.
Okay. Let me clarify. I like people being there as long as I can get the equipment I need.
Yes, and
I
the
don't like
people
to fight for equipment,
and the people
especially towards the end of prep. Then I'm like, my patience is like this long, and I don't want to do that.
Yes.
So,
Yep.
so I feel like it's sometimes like where you're at in prep, but also like personality. Because I feel like I'm
Hmm.
probably also kind of in between you guys in personality too, in terms of like introvert, extrovert. Like sometimes I'm on the more introvert side, sometimes I'm on the more extrovert side. I feel the
Hmm.
problem for me is it's like if I work out at home, like I'm in my comfort zone, right? So it goes back to like what we were talking about earlier. So it's really easy for me
True.
to just go into the kitchen or to come up and do work or to not push intensity because I'm more comfortable. I feel like if I push myself into the gym and leave the house, whatever gym we're going to EOS now, right? It just forces me to be out of my comfort zone. I'm like, okay, well, this is the place I come to do this work, and so I know that since I'm here, like mentally, I'm here to do this work, not to take it too easy, not to do dumb stuff, but like the entire reason I came here is to accomplish this job, to do this goal, right? Um, and so I feel like for me mentally, that's the huge benefit that I get. It's like, okay, cool. I get to go home when I'm done with the job. And it doesn't behoove me or benefit me if I, phone it out here. I'm gonna come in, I'm gonna do the work and I'm gonna make it happen. So that's like the mindset of why like leaving the house for the gym works for me. And of course, yeah, man, it sucks. Like even when I'm not in prep, I hate waiting on equipment.
Yeah. Right. Because my big thing is, how are you supposed to train legs like with the set of dumbbells? Like I don't. I mean, there's certain things you can do, but we're very limited, right? So if you're gonna prep, make sure that you have a decent gym around you, and preferably one that's not overly super crowded. Just even if it doesn't have the most equipment, just so you can get in there and do what you need to do. Some of these gyms like crunch down like in a channel side, like I did my first prep out of that gym, and I don't know how on God's green earth I did. I split time between there and Powerhouse, but
That's
I spent most of my time at Powerhouse because that is,
yeah.
especially like around 5 o'clock when I would train. I mean, it's
uh,
you can't
That's
do
a
anything.
no, that's a great point because I've been going to Crunch Channel side a lot more frequently, and just because of convenience and it saves me
Hmm.
so much time.
Oh, it was
But
right across the street. It was
oh yeah,
so easy. Yeah,
it's like not that my other gym Powerhouse is that far, but it's like when traffic, it's time I don't have.
it's not close.
It's not. But I have found like more recently too, with it being the
Hmm.
new year, I've had to start going a little bit earlier than I normally like to go because it is so busy and I get so frustrated when I walk in and I have to like completely rearrange my whole workout because like nothing is available, right?
Yeah.
But something else to bring up too, on the whole gym side of things is I don't think this is absolutely a given because I know there are many people out there that don't have this, but it's going to make your life a lot easier is in prep, specifically at the end of prep. Like your cardio is going to get high, right? And for me, I always end up splitting it up between two sessions towards the end of prep. So for me, it's really really helpful to have a piece of cardio equipment. I have an apartment, so I have my apartment gym, but I also have my Peloton bike. And so I know I've had a couple clients ask, they're like, would it be helpful if I had even just like a secondhand treadmill at home to use in prep? And I'm like, absolutely, right? Unless like you live, let's say, right across from the gym. Most people don't, but it's just going to save a little bit of time and energy towards the end of your prep if you don't have to drive to the gym multiple times a day. Or let's say your cardio is really high, and one day you're having to go to the gym, get in all your cardio and your lift in one go around. That could be a lot. Again, it's not impossible. I understand not everybody's going to be able to get a piece of cardio equipment at their home or use their apartment gym, but it is something like if you have the means to do so, I mean, go on Facebook Marketplace, look and see if there's like a secondhand spin bike, elliptical, treadmill, because it can really make your life easier.
That's a good point. That's a
Love
good
my
point.
love it.
Yeah.
And it used to be like that stuff used to be expensive.
Hmm.
Like getting a treadmill used to be super expensive. Now you can go on Amazon and get some cheaper treadmills, pretty inexpensive. And you can get secondhand ones pretty expensive because I feel like during COVID, everyone decided to buy equipment and now nobody wants it
Yeah.
anymore. So now you can actually get it cheaper. It's about the
Yeah.
only thing you can get cheaper these days. But
I know, right? Well, and some gyms too, I think like smaller gyms even will get rid of their equipment every once in a while and like sell it. So you can
mhm.
always find something secondhand, but I do think it just makes your life a lot easier, especially in the depths of prep. Something else I think that we can touch on as far as like a relatively small thing that I think some people tend to overlook, or again, kind of going back to the stress side of things, maybe they just ignore it because it's sometimes easier said than done, but that would be sleep and the importance of sleep and like treating it like it is a job. Like sleep is not, it's not a luxury here. It's something that, you're going to need to not only recover effectively, but, it's going to crush your progress at the end of prep. If like you're just chronically sleep deprived, it's going to make things 10 times harder than they need to be.
Yeah.
True.
And like there's actually studies that have shown like sleep's detrimental effect on fat loss. And so not only will poor sleep or not enough sleep have a detrimental effect on your ability to lose body fat, it's also going to increase hunger signaling. And so what they noticed in the study I'm thinking of specifically is like protein hunger signaling went way up, which yeah, there could be worse, but hunger signaling when you're dieting down and working hard, like no mas, like no more.
We want to keep that low as we can. Yeah.
Right. Like the trick is to manage that as best possible throughout prep so that you can actually stay successful anyway. So why, if you're not paying attention to that, you're literally making one of the biggest, one of the other big pieces of the puzzle like more difficult. You're like taking off the picture on the puzzle essentially and then like trying to put it together.
And Steven, that's a great point. I can tell you this is like the leanest I got at a prep with the least amount of movement and cardio. And the big factor that changed with me is I was able to get my sleep better. My sleep improved a lot and my was able to lose fat way, way, way easier than I ever have in the past.
Yeah. I mean,
Very true.
it's a good point too, Stephen. You mentioned the hunger signaling. I mean, I always notice in prep if I'm not getting a lot of sleep, or let's just say it's one morning where I like wake up really randomly, like really early, I am 10 times hungrier throughout the day, and it makes life a lot harder. Whereas those days where you sleep in a little bit, it's nice because you don't feel as like ravenous. That ghrelin isn't beating at your stomach as intensely as it would otherwise.
Yeah, and there's two big parts of sleep. Is one is that you're getting enough sleep. So you're sleeping for long enough. And then the second one is your sleep quality, right? So making sure that while you're asleep, you're getting enough of your REM sleep, you're getting enough of your deep sleep, and that you're like it's not interrupted, et cetera, et cetera. And so, like the ones I find that have the hardest time with this are people who do shift work that go from nights to mornings all the time because their circadian rhythm is effed. Because another big thing that sleep does is it helps us to dictate our circadian rhythm, just like sunlight does and sun exposure and such. And so, when our circadian rhythm is natural and correct and consistent, we see that our body is like releasing hormones when it should. Like cortisol is high when it should be high, it's low when it should be low, right? Testosterone is high when it should be high, low when it should be low. Those things get normalized. And if your sleep is all goofed up, like all those things are going to have a cascading effect. Like there's going to be at least some impact on that as well, especially if it's messed up on a regular and consistent basis.
No, it's a great point. I think something that will help with sleep and help lower stress and help with all of that stuff is making sure that you have a supportive partner at home. If you're married, if boyfriend, girlfriend, whatever the situation is with that, um, even family. Like if you're living at home with your family, they don't have to be like your biggest cheerleader with it, but it's very hard if you have all that stress and everything you're putting on yourself and then someone else that doesn't support you in that journey with it. Now, when I say support, it doesn't mean that you could just yell at your partner and then be okay with it. It doesn't mean any of that. It doesn't justify anything. But it's one of those things they have to be, at least some degree of understanding because some things are going to be given up, right? Like going out to dinner sometimes is going to be given up. Going to some events might be given up. That's the goal is to not give a lot of that up, but some partners do want to do more than others, right? Some people are more outgoing than others. Some people are more social creatures than others, and that's different for every single situation, right? So just the fact that they can understand that is big. It'll lower stress, it'll make sleep better, it'll do all that. I think having a lot of stability at home helps throughout everything.
Oh, I agree. I 100% agree. I moved in when I prepped in yeah, when I prepped in 2021, I guess it was. I don't know what year was, but I moved in between or in the middle of that prep, not far at all, just like literally a couple blocks away, but it was a transition from living with a roommate, that was my last college roommate, and then moving out on my own. And I remember
Hmm.
I didn't realize like how many I was walking on eggshells around my old roommate because it ended up not being a great situation. And I remember moving into my own space and literally like that same week oh my god, I felt so much lighter, my sleep improved, my digestion improved, and it was just crazy. It was just the only difference was that environment. I was on my own. I wasn't walking on eggshells around somebody that, I felt really uneasy around. So that was a huge game changer. And that was in the middle of my prep too. So that was kind of cool to see how like my body shifted and responded so much more favorably when I got out of that like high stress environment that I didn't even realize was so high stress in the moment because I had just kind of normalized it for so long.
And that's like one of those interesting things because like you're talking about how getting better sleep and the stress management can help a lot of those other things. So it's funny because we started on stress, but stress management can also be a really great way to get better sleep. Like especially if you've gotten good at meditation, like cool, do some meditation before bed, like calm down, like remove the amount of like blue lights or bright lights that you have, have a specific like wind down schedule to where okay, I read for 10, 15 minutes, I shut off the light, I go to sleep, right? That's the end of the night, so that you're used to it too. It's like setting up those habits around your sleep also can be super beneficial. Cutting off caffeine too late in the day, right? Not making the full cup when you should have made the Nespresso one. Uh, those kind of things all can be super beneficial in terms of improving your sleep quality. But it's funny because it leads into the next one that I think I know we wanted to talk about was like if your digestion sucks, right? Like it's a problem.
Yeah, like you said a little while ago, Stephen, prep is not probably going to make anything better, right? So like this goes for your digestion, this goes for even like your body image or your relationship with food. I think kind of ties in here. Like if you're starting prep in those unfavorable circumstances, your digestion is really off, or your relationship with food is not in a good spot. Well, you're not going to start prep. It's probably not going to get better, right? It's either going to stay the same or probably get worse. And so I think it is a good point to bring up. Digestion, it's so important, so important, because for a lot of competitors, it does suffer at the end of prep. And when I say suffer, usually there are ways we can work to get it to a good spot. But a lot of people generally will have a little bit of a kind of a point in prep where digestion slows and we have to troubleshoot there. So if you're starting prep and your digestion is just not in a good spot and you don't have it well managed, well, it's probably only, unfortunately, gonna get worse if you try to prep around it.
Yeah, I think that can go a few ways too. If your digestion is not great going into prep because your food choices aren't the best, then sometimes
Being
going
an
into prep,
asshole.
Yeah,
you
that's one
eat like an
thing.
asshole, which we all do from time to time, right? It's one of those things that when you get into prep and you eliminate that stuff, sometimes that part can be improved with it, but it's understanding that, right? And it's also actually understanding if you have a digestive issue or just because everyone in the fitness industry just wants to preach digestion from the roof now. That which is my biggest pet peeve in the world. Not everyone has PCOS. Not it's not like everyone makes it out
Not
to be.
everybody has SIBO. What?
Everyone has SIBO. Yes, everyone does. It's like the way I look at it's like going to WebMD and typing out why I have a headache, and all of a sudden you're dying of brain cancer, right? Like it's you don't. The
Yeah.
more you look at that stuff, the more it can be weird. But look, if you're eating good food choices and you're having bad digestive issues, then it's something to look at. But if you're backed up a little bit because of poor food choices, or you're less weight under backed up because of poor food choices, then a lot of that could just be eliminated. I like to before I even prep people through a longer off season, especially if we're on a macro base and we roll into it. I'm like, okay, we're gonna go to like a good 3 weeks of like, let's clean up our food here. Let's make sure everything's in a good spot. If we're in a good spot, let's pull the trigger and let's go with it. Let's kind of eliminate some of those things. Let's see it. And 99% of the time, everyone's like, I feel great. Everything's good. I feel good. Let's roll with it. Um, but yeah, obviously digestion is really important. And that goes to like sweating the small stuff. And people say, oh, I can't have this during prep. I had a client I just started working with yesterday, and his previous coach said, you can't have any protein shakes during prep. He's like, never told me a reason why or anything. I'm like, listen, I wouldn't do like old school Hunter Labrada style to where all 6 meals are protein shakes. I think that's over the top with it. I was like, and you can look at his transformation, how much better he got when he put whole foods in. He still had them, but he put whole foods in and how much difference it made. But here's the deal. If you digest it well, it doesn't really honestly matter. Doesn't. Doesn't. I mean, maybe towards the end when you try to pull out some variables on things, sure. But like the vast majority of it, come on. So it's that's something I feel like is overblown is what is on limits and off limits,
Yep.
Yeah.
especially for specific foods. Okay, because protein shake, no one's going to consider that like a dessert, right? It's a damn protein shake. It may
I
be
don't know.
taste
The
decent, but
creamy things are popular right now, right?
Oh,
that's
oh,
yeah, that is true. That is true.
those
You can
are
make it into a dessert, right?
good. The creamy, I have officially jumped on the creamy gang, and let me tell you, I understand the obsession.
No,
But
I got
look,
too much shit.
more things can make those less healthy too, right? Like if you start putting a ton of sugar-free jello in there, you start putting a ton of other things that some people don't digest the best in
Hmm.
there, then you can take something healthy and then turn make it to where it's hard to digest.
Mhm.
So
Yeah.
there's a lot of factors that kind of play into this, but digestion is something you need to pay attention to. But just because you have poor digestion doesn't mean you have a digestive issue. It could be a food issue.
Yeah, and I think too, when it comes to like identifying if you truly have a digestion issue that you need to look further into before just, claiming that you have whatever your favorite influencer on Instagram is preaching. I think it's important to consider like consistency too, right? Like how consistent have you been with your food choices? Like if you're eating something
Mhm.
drastically different day to day and like there is just no consistency there, well, you really need to rein it in and give yourself at least a solid few weeks of just being very consistent. And then if the problem proceeds, well, then okay, then this is probably something I need to look into, right? But
Mhm.
if you're just assuming, oh, something's wrong, but you have had like absolutely no consistency when it comes to, your food choices and things of that nature, then it's really hard to really, say if you have an actual true digestion issue or not.
Yeah. And you can't really do an elimination if you're not eating similar or the same foods on a regular basis, anyways. I also think, excuse me, this goes with like, and don't get me wrong, meal plans can be great. But one of the things that I'm not necessarily always the biggest fan of meal plans on is if you've never eaten any of those foods in your life, or you hate those foods, or they're foods don't digest well or work well for you, well, guess what? That meal plan needs to get changed. There has to be something there that changes. We all have different preferences, things we digest better, things we don't. Like, don't give Paul ice cream, right? Like we all know that one. It's going to be a bad time. So understanding like our own digestion is huge there. And then being open and aware of, like, if your coach is giving you something and you're like, yo, I've been living in this body for 36 years and you're giving me grapefruit, and I can tell you right now, like, that's going to be a no-go. So we need to figure something else out there. Like, hey, I need to be able to say that. Or
Mhm.
if I'm gluten intolerant, like if I have celiacs, right, and I can't do gluten, and there's like bread on there, like, yo, I like can't do that, homie. Like, let's do a potato or something, or a sweet potato. Like, let's find something else out. And then Evan like touched on it just ever so succinctly, but this is a huge one for me. The fake sugar stuff, like the calorie-free, like fit-friendly food stuff. Um, I see people overdo those all the time, and it wrecks them. It wrecks their GI. Because yeah, there's nothing inherently wrong with them. And as long as you're doing well and feeling good and great, but I see people go overboard on those things because they're hungry and they're trying to fill up with a sweet tooth, whatever it might be. Um, and like Walden Farms is one where I
Oh
feel
my
like a lot.
gosh.
It wrecks me, destroys me, like cleans me
It
out.
wrecks almost everyone.
Oh,
There's certain things I know that like are not they're not inherently bad by any means. Like for example, like in prep, sugar-free or reduced sugar ketchup, right? Love it. But and it's, there's nothing wrong with it, but I just know myself and there are certain little things where it's like you almost take it to like you just take it to the extreme. You use too much of it, right? Too much of it. And so I don't buy it because I know I have a tendency to overdo it, right? Not that like a serving of reduced sugar ketchup is going to kill you, right? But I think where people fall into this bad trap is when they take those lower calorie or 0 calorie options and they just overdo them, right? They're putting it literally on everything, and that's when it can become an issue. So like for me, if I know like there's certain foods that I'm gonna maybe overdo it with like that, then I just don't even buy them because I'm like, I'm not even gonna endeavor that route.
Yeah, I could
yeah.
go down a rabbit hole on this for a while. I'm not going to do that. But Andrew Huberman, I was on the way back from Danielle's family from Maryland. And I listened to Andrew Huberman's podcast. I can't remember the guy's name he had on there, and they were talking about like the FDA, the Food and Drug Administration, and like food in the grocery store. And 75% of the food in the grocery store doesn't even fit the definition of food anymore.
Ugh, that's so
It's
scary.
so many
American cheese dog.
additives, so much everything in there. It's listen, and your body's not meant to do that. Like, here's a prime example. Anyone that's been overseas for any extended period of time, that not the United States, you can eat a bunch of their food and you feel pretty damn good.
It's just tastier. The eggs are
It tastes
tastier.
better, you
They have a better
digest it better.
color to them.
And it's, I swear, it's like you just don't gain weight either. It's wild. Like
Oh,
it's,
whoops.
well, yeah, see, present company excluded, right?
I just got back from my honeymoon for a few weeks.
Yes.
So I definitely gained
Valid.
a little bit of weight, but reasonable amount. But yeah, I find it's the sugar alcohols
Yeah.
that really wreck the worst, like the erythritol and stuff. I feel like that's what I see people have the biggest problem with.
Added fiber.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Yeah, and it's definitely very person dependent too, because I'll get people that just like they'll ask me, "Oh, do you consume artificial sweeteners in prep?" And I'll say, "Well, yeah, but I know which ones don't bother me." Yeah, like I'll drink an energy drink, and gosh, I remember this
Who
year drinking
cares? Yeah.
energy.
Didn't you just
Like,
have an espresso?
It was, I meant to be a double, but it was only a single. So I have to
my God.
supplement. And I didn't work out today, so I didn't have my caffeine in my pre-workout. I have a minimum
Wow.
level I need to reach the function, Steven.
Sorry, like I'm medicated today, so I noticed.
My gosh, that's funny. But yeah, it's gonna be person dependent too, because like I can tell you, I remember this past year asking Paul, like, can I have an energy drink? Because we were like the day before my show, we were going to the gym, and he's like, well, yeah, I don't see an issue, and I know like I just don't like bloat from them by any means. So it's going to be very person dependent too. Like, I can't sit here and say to one person, it's just going to be depending on how your body responds to certain things and what your tolerance is, right? Some people don't have a high tolerance for artificial sweeteners. Some people have a very moderate, which that's kind of me. Like I can overdo it, but I also can have a little bit without noticing an issue. So it's all kind of about knowing your tolerance, and don't go around asking your favorite competitors, oh, do you cut out artificial sweeteners? And then thinking, well, if they say no, then that means you can't have any. It's really just kind of about learning your body and being self-aware and knowing what your tolerance is.
Side note, I cannot tell you how many very popular people I've seen talking about doing no cardio online, doing cardio, like that I've seen doing cardio in the gym. So like they'll also don't always take that stuff for face value, right? Get a little bit of a sniff test going. If it walks like a duck, if it quacks like a duck, it might be a duck. See what I'm
Yeah.
saying, dog?
Well, I think so I mean you bring up like cardio for a sec. I think we could touch on too like type of cardio and modality because I think that that can be something that when you're not in prep it doesn't matter a ton, you know, if you're doing your cardio on one machine compared to the other. However, when you do get deeper into prep, this is definitely a variable that I am a little like I'm a lot more like nitty-gritty with my clients about, you know, some clients I will have them stay away from a certain machine because we know that they're very prone to inflammation. So I think talking briefly about like cardio and cardio modality could be important, like little potential like small thing that you do want to sweat, especially towards the end of prep.
Yeah. And I think so what I'm talking about, and it's funny because they'll say no cardio, but they're doing 20,000 steps a day, right?
Oh yeah.
And so like within the cardio space, I'm definitely on board with you. I want to keep cardio within essentially what we call VT1 or valentary threshold one, where you could do it for hours and hours on end, and it doesn't take up your recovery. Because I want your recovery to be on rebuilding and keeping as much muscle as possible during that phase. Sometimes I say maybe you have too much muscle in some places. Cool. Maybe we can do a little bit more intensive cardio there. Maybe we don't need to worry about it as much. But for the most part, I'd be with you on that. In terms of there are certain things I stay away from, but then there's also a big banner of things where I'm like, take your choice. You want to do a little bit of swimming? Cool. As long as you don't drown, I'm happy. You want to do the recumbent bike for a session because we've been beat up? Cool. But I also, with that cardio, I separate the cardiovascular activity and the step count stuff. Because what happens a lot of times is as you're dieting down and you're tired, you're roughed up, it's getting towards the end of the prep, things are tough. Um, you can just start moving less, right? If you're really beat up, maybe your workouts aren't as good, your cardio's not as intense. That's all calorie expenditure, or it can be calorie expenditure. So I like to separate those two. So we have that really low intensity lifestyle movement stuff that, okay, cool. We just know we need to hit a step count for that to keep it stable. So it's not dropping down and we're losing expenditure there. And then the rest of the cardio, I'm like, make sure you don't die, right? Pretty broad statement, generally speaking.
But did you die?
But did you die? Lots. I've died like 14 times inside, in my heart.
Oh, Steve. Yeah, I know towards the end of prep, like I mentioned earlier, I have a Peloton bike and you know, it can be a little I mean, it depends what classes you choose, I guess. It can be a little bit higher impact or, you know, a little bit more on my legs. So I know at the end of prep, like I have a max of amount of cardio I'll do on it. Because if I'm doing all my cardio on my Peloton bike, my legs would probably be like swollen balloons and I would probably be just super inflamed. And then that would also take away from like the quality of my lifts. So I know I get definitely a lot more technical at the end of prep with like what I'm doing for my cardio, whether it's my Peloton or incline walking, and just watching inflammation there. But I think step count is something that is important to talk about and just to track because, you know, you're so right. Like when you are in the depths of prep, your body gets so good at conserving energy, right? So you may not even realize it, but your energy expenditure, your neat activity, all that activity that you just do passively outside of the gym and outside of your actual cardio, it drastically increase or decreases if you're not really watching out for it. So I love and I always make sure I have a step goal for my clients, especially, you know, in the depths of prep, because that can be a really good way also to just increase like very, very low impact energy expenditure on a daily basis.
Yeah, I think honestly, that's one of the most important things. I don't have a lot of things that I like require from people competing, especially if it's their first time. One of them that is not a deal breaker, but pretty close, is not having a step tracker. I think it is very important to be able to know how much you're moving. And it's very difficult to coach someone when you don't know how much they're moving. It's hard. It's really hard. Because that's where we burn most of our calories, right? That's where we burn most of them. And I think this past prep, I did like realistically, I think I did like four cardio sessions on a piece of equipment. But I was also getting up and I was walking every morning, and I walked a minimum of 10,000 steps a day. And when I needed to get a little farther, I moved it to 15,000 steps a day. So I was moving, but it wasn't anything strenuous. It wasn't Stairmaster. It wasn't hill sprints. It wasn't anything like that. It wasn't heart rate at a certain level. It was nothing like that with that. But you still have to track and know how much you're doing, or else it's just a shot in the dark. It's like, I mean, we weigh ourselves, we weigh our food, we weigh all these measurables. Why would we not handle that, which is our biggest proponent of fat burning?
Yeah.
Why would we not care? And that's why I hate that stupid Whoop band, because it's the only one that doesn't count steps, and everyone has it and pays their fee, and it doesn't have a step counter on it, which
Take
drives me
that,
nuts.
Whoop. Take that.
Take that Whoop. Put a step tracker on there. You have everything else. Why can't you do that?
So, all right, side note question. So I know, and Peloton has been wildly popular. People love it. They have the rower, the treadmill, the bike, all that stuff. But I know they also track a lot of the data, right? Because like my mother-in-law is a huge Peloton fan. Like she
Oh yeah,
goes to
I
the
remember
studio,
that.
she does the classes
I
in
remember
person,
I met her and she had the shirt on and we like talked about it. Yes.
loves it. So like, do you find yourself, because I know she is like, she's not a bodybuilding prepper or whatever, do you find yourself getting caught up in like the data, like, oh, I have to like beat my max wattage or my output, or like, do you find that in prep that bothers you, or are you able to like manage that, knowing like, okay, that's not the most important, or that's not the main goal at this point?
Yeah, no, I know what you mean. Yeah, so it tracks like your output, right? And so I like part of me, this has definitely been something mentally I've had to work on because like I'm just very competitive by nature with myself. And so, I always want to like get a new PR, right? But I'm more so I kind of know what like my baseline output is and like, what a moderate intensity cardio session output is going to be. And so I just use it more so as like a baseline and just for consistency, right? That therefore I know every session I'm probably burning the same amount because I don't really pay attention to how many calories it tells me I'm burning. 'Cause I don't, that's not super relevant, but the output I pay attention to, right? And I more so just use it as a baseline. But I am not somebody like I don't stress over because they make a big deal out of like milestones, your 100th ride, your 200th ride, all of this. And like there's, those types of things. Or sometimes there's these challenges too, like I think they call it like Fondo or whatever. I don't know. I don't participate in any of that. And honestly, it's kind of funny because when you get on the bike, you'll get these alerts. Like if there's other people on the bike at the same time, like are hitting milestones or they've hit a streak, it'll alert you. And so I always like laugh because it'll pop up if somebody's hit it'll say, oh, so and so's hit a 20-day streak. And I never give them a high five. This sounds kind of bad, but I never give them a high five because in my mind, I'm like, I don't like the fact that like they're not resting. Like that's not a badge of honor
Mm-hmm.
20 days in a row. So
Hater,
I
hater.
never, yeah, I'm like always just laughing at that.
Cold hearted Lexi.
What? Cold
Cold
heart.
hearted Lexi.
I
What
know,
if
right?
that's all they do though? What if they don't do anything else? What if that's their only form of exercise?
Well, and I think that's where the majority of like your hardcore like Peloton people like this is their like that is their main form of working out, right? Like I don't think there are a lot of bodybuilders that use it. So I love it, but I don't feed too much into like the whole like the metrics. I just use my output as a baseline of knowing, okay, I'm, relatively hitting around this output every session. That means I'm keeping my intensity very consistent. And that can become really, really helpful towards the end of prep too. When naturally you may want to give a little bit less. It's really like a good way for me to make sure I'm just keeping the same level of intensity with each of my cardio sessions.
No,
Yeah.
and I think tracking. Look, I'm a fan of data too, so I like tracking your cardio. I like understanding kind of what your heart rate is. Like I ask a couple different things. Like if someone has an Apple Watch, I'm like, I want to know the time because obviously we prescribe that, like the time, the duration, your heart rate, and I want to know what it says the active calorie burn was on there. I want to see what that is because if that makes sense, then later on in prep, when we do really want to manage fatigue, let's just go for a calorie burn on there. I don't care how you get there. If you feel great and want to do the Stairmaster, cool. Don't have time to do it, cool. If you want to go outside and walk for 2 hours to get that calorie burn at like a 1 mile per hour, go for it. Cool. Works for me. Right. But we don't know that unless we have data at least tracked to some degree.
Yeah, data is so important in prep, and there's really not a way around it. And it's something else that that you're talking about the data kind of sparked is talking about. I personally think like the importance of daily weigh-ins is so important, and I know that this is something some clients struggle with. They don't want to have to weigh in daily, or like they don't have a great relationship with the scale. Therefore, they don't want to have to get on the scale every day and weigh themselves. But the way I look at it is I know you guys are the same way. We're not just fixated on how much the client weighs on check-in day, right? Like we look at the average. The average is going to speak volumes compared to just one data point, right? Who knows? That could be a day where the client is up a pound because because they just started their cycle, or you know what I mean? Like having all of the data really provides us as coaches with, we're able to do our job a lot better and have more information to base our decisions on. So I think that's something that's important too. Like if you are somebody who doesn't quite have a great relationship with the scale and is not comfortable stepping on it daily, I would say that's something you need to consider and work on before endeavoring a prep, because you're only cutting yourself short and your coach short of valuable data if you're not willing to, to track that day to day.
Yeah, I mean, we're always looking at trends and averages and kind of what's going on. And obviously, we're basing those with maybe whatever measurements we might have you taking and the pictures that you're taking, right? And we've all been doing this for quite a while. Like, I can tell that, okay, maybe you look less lean, air quotes here, but in this week's pictures, but the lighting is terrible, right? It's completely different lighting and we can't even see anything. So, yeah, of course you look less lean because the camera's not working as well and we're not seeing the same stuff. So it's easy for us to get in our heads with that stuff. And that's kind of why you want to take that stuff and kind of almost put a dividing line between your emotions and your prep data. Because if you're paying a coach, you're paying them to worry about it. Like that is my job now. Like, great. If I didn't do a good job worrying about it, fire me, yell at me, whatever. Cool. Please don't yell at me. I have tender feelings. Actually, I take that back. But like I'm now responsible for it. So part of the beauty of hiring a coach for this stuff is that you don't have to hold on to your control, your emotions. If you're doing what your coach is asking you and you're doing everything they're asking you, we're the accountable ones. Your coach is the accountable one. So you can kind of take a step back from that, really like, oh man, the weight's up and I feel out of control, or I don't feel good about it because, the number's up. Like that's somebody else's problem to worry about at that point.
Yeah. I think that's well, this is something that's this is kind of a backwards way of looking at this conversation, but something I think that people stress over that doesn't matter as much is what that amount is you weigh on stage.
Yeah.
Like I think that's kind of the opposite, but it's also similar to what we've been talking about. And that, look, no one on stage, everyone knows this, no one judge ass on stage unless you're in a weight category. What do you weigh? How much cardio you did? What your training split looked like?
How much you
What you
squat?
ate? How much you squat? None of that. Like how many no days off you had in a row. No one cares about any of that. It's literally what you look like on stage. And people do get fixated on a number. I used to do that. This prep messed with me because I was considerably lighter than I was on another prep, but I know I was leaner and bigger, right? So there's a bunch of factors that kind of play into that. But when you stop worrying about that, everything gets better, right? Now, does it matter? Sure, it matters. Like, of course, we look at the numbers. It's not like it's irrelevant data, but it's also not the only piece of data that we work at. I tell you, I would rather never have body weight and have good, consistent pictures with good lighting from the same distance and the same aspect ratio every single week than weight any day of the week. But I want it all. I also want the weight. But if I'm going to have one or the other, the look is more important than the number it says.
Well, I think that brings up a great point to kind of touch on real quick too, would be the progress pictures and lighting and just consistency of them, right? You know, I will tell clients, like if I don't like the lighting in their pictures, I will tell them, hey, we need to find a new spot for your pictures,
Mhm.
or you need to get a ring light. Like lighting is so important because by the nature of online coaches, that's how we see you, right? So if your pictures are, with the window to the side of you or behind you where there's like a big glare on you, well,
I
that's
know, yeah.
that's that's going to be really hard for as coaches for us to be able to see how you truly look, right? And if you just want to, like, if you're listening and you want to play around with it, look how, like, take your pictures in different lightings and look how different you look lighting to lighting, right? The best way to get like the best lighting would be to face towards natural light, like facing towards a window, and to not have windows on the side or behind you. That's going to yield like the best lighting. But I know some people also take their pictures like really early in the morning before the sun comes out. So those are going to be the people that, don't just settle for that really gloomy lighting. I would get a ring light. I would make sure that your lighting is still optimal, because at the end of the day, if your lighting sucks, you're only hurting yourself, right? Because your coach is going to only be able to go off of that and judge you from that, which that's going to look drastically different than probably how you actually look in person, you know? So lighting is so important, you
Huge.
know, when it comes to progress pictures. And I would even go a step farther and say, like, specifically with competitors, I like trying to wear the same thing every week for progress pictures, whether that be a posing suit or, you know, just like the same attire. That way, you know, you're not wearing something drastically different. You want consistency in those pictures week to week for sure.
And this one is weird. I feel weird saying this, but I've heard stories of it happening. For God's sake, don't touch up, don't enhance, don't change, don't Photoshop your friggin' check-in pictures. Like, because you can't do that stuff on stage. Let us see what you really look like. And I know, like I said, it's a weird one. I feel weird even saying it, but because I've heard stories of it happening, just don't do it. And that sounds straightforward, but just don't do that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I think that's the first like 5 check-ins I have with most people is we need to do better with pictures. Um, and I do my best to explain it beforehand, but they are very, very, very important, like very important. And I tell people, I don't want this ankle down up. Well, that's the way the judges see you. I don't care the way the judges see you. I want to see a full, honest look at your physique. Give me what it looks like straight on here, so I can see your ratios. I can see how everything flows together with that. And it it's just the way I look at pictures and the way I look at all data is this is just a giant science experiment, right? With data collections. And you have your variables and you have your control groups. Your control groups are like how you weigh yourself fasted when you first get up in the morning and how you take your progress pictures. We have to have something to compare about to see if the changes we making are working. And if we only have a piece of that information, it's hard to know. It's hard to know. And I can tell you there is a direct correlation between people that take their check-in pictures seriously and how they look in the final product compared to people that don't.
Absolutely. Yeah, I have a whole section now, like in my starting documents, of how to take the best pictures. Because you're right, Evan. It's especially like with newer people who are, you know, newer to having an online coach. It's definitely something that, you know, some people have to work on in the beginning, but it's so, so important. And even something as simple as, if you guys don't know, I mean, I'm sure most of you guys do, like with your phone, using the back camera instead of the front camera is going to be a lot better quality. And getting like a tripod or getting something like where either taking like setting your phone on video mode, standing in front
Mhm.
of it, screenshotting pictures, or getting one of those like the tripods with the controllers where you can take the pictures on your own. Because I have never had anybody else take my progress pictures, and because I've always just like lived alone, or I've lived alone when I've been in bodybuilding, and I still sometimes hear from some clients like, "Hey, couldn't take pictures today because my husband wasn't home to take them," and I'm like, you don't need other people to take your progress pictures. Like,
Yeah.
get a tripod or prop your phone up, put it on video setting. It's pretty easy to do that.
It is, and especially, I mean, every iPhone has a 10-second timer on it now too, where you can put on. That's what I use with it. And sometimes I'll do that. I'll do those, a few of those, then and I don't just do one, I do multiples. And then I'll do a video, and then I'll see which one looks the best with the lighting and the most consistent with it. And I repeat that time after time. And I'm even like, hey, stay the same distance away from the camera, have the same height of the tripod. Let's keep this super consistent. Now, if you're traveling, we can only do things so much. But there's also things you can do to remedy with that, right? Like step it out. Take 7 steps away from the camera. Step it out, right? Put it up on your waist, like the tripod. You don't have to get exact measurement. Pull the tripod up in your waist, be like, okay, it's right here, right above my belly button. Okay, that's going to be close enough. And I take 7 steps back from there and I turn around. You're going to be pretty damn consistent with it. And it doesn't take a lot. You don't have to carry around a tape measure with you. Like it's just create a few things to help the consistency of it. I think that's severely overlooked. And I think it is one of the most important parts, especially for us, right? Because that's how a lot of the ways we make decisions on things.
Yeah.
Yeah. And something too, like this is going to sound really silly, but I feel like, especially like by the nature of prep, and this doesn't happen very often, but if a competitor, like they send their picture or pictures one week without their heels, that makes a big difference too, especially in the back post. Like if you're not wearing heels, that can make a big difference in just how you look. And it seems like such a minor thing, but it can really make a difference in how your progress pictures look.
Well, it's not even just that. Like, you taking the check-in picture stuff seriously as a competitor also gives me other opportunities. One, it gives me an opportunity to critique posing and tell you if we need to change something. If you're
Yep.
wearing your suit, it gives me the opportunity to say, okay, hey, our suit's maybe a little too high because we need more upper glute still. I want you to pull that down and try and cover that up just a little bit. Yeah, I know it changed shape. Or if you have a ton of upper glute, like, hey, you're making your glutes look smaller. You need to pull your connectors up for bikini, that kind of stuff. Or like for men's physique or bodybuilders, like, hey, I want your chest up a little bit more here, or hey, I need your shoulder forward a little bit more here. Like, it also gives us the opportunity to critique that kind of stuff, which also makes a huge impact on stage because your posing is not great, as my phone listens to me and talks. But if your posing is not great or where it could be, and we can make that better throughout the process, like much, much preferred over like saying, hey, we're going to ignore this. I'm not going to address it at all. And then we get on stage and our posing looks all jacked up and we're like, but I don't understand. Like, yeah, well, take it seriously. Like if you're a competitor that wears heels, wear your suit, do your poses. If you're, any kind of male competitor, do your mandatories, right? So if you're a bodybuilder classic, do your quarter turns, maybe send in a front or rear double bicep every once in a while. If you're men's physique, make sure you're doing your front and backs. Um, that way, like, hey, we can say, hey, I think we can be a little bit wider. Hey, we're a little bit unsymmetrical here. Hey, we need to turn our feet in more, like, or out more, whatever it might be. It gives us the opportunity to also improve those things as well, which can be like super helpful and important for what actually shows up on stage.
Posing so important, and hopefully by now people realize like that is not something you should sweat in prep. Like you should be practicing that. I mean, you should be practicing that well before you start prep. Like if you're
Yeah.
waiting until the moment you start prep to like practice posing for the first time ever, well, can you do that? Yeah, but you're probably not going to compare well to those people that have been practicing for years and years when you get on stage, unless every once in a while, I'll work with some people like who they maybe were dancers or they've been, gymnasts, and they just naturally kind of have that grace and that flow. But practicing your posing super early on is important. And one quick thing I want to touch on too, this is specific for mainly, I'm talking like, I guess it would apply to wellness, but mainly bikini is going to be, Stephen, you touched a little bit on it, but like bottoms and the coverage, right? I want to touch really quickly on that because that is something like you may think as a first time competitor, somebody who's new in the sport, that like the bottom coverage doesn't really matter. However, if you have too much coverage in your what? I can't.
I'm whispering that it matters.
Oh, yeah, it matters. Yes, it matters because if you have too much coverage, well, that can be a bad thing, right? Because the judges can't see your glutes enough to judge them. But also, I've seen it before where girls have too little coverage, and actually, too little coverage can almost sometimes have the illusion of like making your glutes look less lean and less conditioned than they really are. And then something Steven mentioned before is like if your bottoms are pulled too high up, that can be bad because essentially you want your suit bottoms to kind of like shape your glutes, right? You don't want them pulled too high up. You also don't want that connector too low because that can that can really take away from the shape of your glutes. So bottom coverage and how your bottoms fit in particular really does matter in NPC bikini. So that's something like if you're unsure about your bottoms and if they fit the criteria, if they fit well, like ask your coach because that is something that can really make a difference in the grand scheme of things.
One other thing, that's all true. Speaking on the bikini front, a lot of girls that want to compete in bikini, um, a lot have athletic backgrounds, a lot have lifted weights for a while, and that's kind of the next logical step, like we talked about. Typically, if that's the type of girl you are not the best at walking in heels. So there is exceptions, but I preach this from day one. When you get those heels, make them a part of your body. Walk around the house and clean them. Do whatever you need to do with it. And no one does it. And then right when they get to end of prep, they look like a deer in the headlights trying to walk in the heels. And they're posing. The mandatories are good, but their transitions are awkward. The movement is awkward. And it's a whole presentation, especially if, because the last thing you want to do is have a bomb physique, be destroying it, nail your posing, but then almost like fall down walking and it not be smooth. Because I tell you, if someone up there has a similar physique and can pose as good as you and has the movement better, they're going to win. It's the total package.
It is. And all those little things too. Like we could do a whole other episode on like stage glam or something like that. But like I think I mean, it matters to a degree, right? Like you want to have that full package. I mean, we've all seen those people that just walk on stage and it's like they have that it factor. It's like
Yeah, it's huge.
all like lights out. Like you can just
Done.
tell they're gonna win the whole show from
Over.
the first 3 seconds they walk on stage. But it's not only their physique, it's not only their suit, but it's their tan, it's their hair, their makeup, their jewelry. It's just like that
Yeah.
total package, right? So I do think that that is important, and not trying to cut corners too much with those little things, because the way I look at it is you work so damn hard for your physique. Like, you would not want to cut corners on something as simple as like your tan or your makeup, and let that be the one thing that keeps you from winning the whole show, right? Like that would be stupid, right? So those little things do matter in the grand scheme of things. Now, when we're talking, like, because I know this is something some girls, they think a lot about in their first prep, like, oh my God, do I need to buy the suit that's like, $1,000, or can I get away with the one that's like, it's decent, but it's not as expensive. A lot of times you can get by with, as long as your suit has crystals on it. It doesn't need to be the most expensive, elaborate suit out there, but I think it is important. Like, you don't want to stand out in a bad way on stage, right? So don't get a suit that has absolutely no crystals, because that's just going to make you stand out in a bad way, right? You want to make sure that you fit in amongst the group that you're comparing to. But I also think that, do you need to buy the $1,000 suit? No, like, you don't need to buy that to do well. You can still settle for something kind of in that medium range, and do well.
Also,
And
like for those of you who aren't aware, there are suit rental companies where you can rent like higher end suits for a much lower price. And there are plenty of message boards and like bikini swap like places where you can get a used bikini, which I know is not going to sound like the most wonderful thing for everybody, at a much lower cost to you as well. Because especially if it's your first show, like, and you're going to spend $1,000 on the suit as well as all the money you spend on coaching, diet, everything else, show entries, like, you better hope that you really love that shit. Like,
Yeah.
you know what I mean? I've had some people that legitimately, it's few and far between, but I've had a few people that legitimately like, yeah, not for me, not my favorite thing. So like, if they had paid $1,000 for a suit, like, now what do they do with that? They can take the hit on reselling it, whatever, but you don't have to put yourself in that position either, you know?
one thing
Yeah.
I want to touch on real quick too about the walking thing that correlates into a lot of this is if you don't feel confident up there, it's going to be hard. And that's why I'm so big on the walking. It is the first thing you do. And if you can't walk and you're constantly worried about tripping or falling, there's no way you're confident. And that confidence is not going to show on stage. It's not.
I like to
No.
call it either BBE or BBV, bad bitch energy, bad bitch vibes. Like,
Mhm.
like you want to really feel them.
I
You want to be feeling yourself on stage. Like, yeah, I got
You
this shit. I
do.
look good.
You do. Well, one last thing I think, kind of before maybe we wrap this episode up, is I think, and this goes perfectly with one of the last things to touch on, would be something to not overlook, would be that like post show phase and staying with your coach after your show, or at least, like, if you're somebody who's really on a budget, at least bargaining or like budgeting to stay with your coach for a couple months post show, and thinking about that post show. I know we don't want to have to think about it, if you haven't competed yet, but it is so important, right? If you just expect to compete and then, oh my God, life goes back to normal after that, you're going to be in for a rude awakening, right? Especially if this is your first time. I don't want to sit here and say plan for the worst, but it's always nice to have that support and that good game plan post show, and to be proactive about having it before you actually compete, right? So I highly recommend, think about that post show before it actually hits you in the face. Have a good game plan with your coach. Reach out to your coach if they, if you don't have a game plan, reach out, a week or two before your show, and, ask, hey, what's our plan post show? What are we going to do after this? That way you have a good game plan in place, and there's not that like weird kind of limbo phase. Because, if you compete and you don't even, something as simple as not having any direction or plan for the next couple of days, that can be a hard place to be in. If you spend a few days going off plan, going off track, and oh my gosh, in 3 days you're up 10 pounds of water weight, like, that can be a slippery slope if you let it. So being proactive and having a good post show plan with your coach is something that you do not want to overlook.
I
Abs-
remember first show for me, first show, second show a week later, 15-pound difference.
Oh,
Oh yeah, not
and
good.
uh,
like, too, because, okay, so it's never like really happened to me post show, but I was here, like, people who gain that weight so quickly, isn't it like uncomfortable too? You feel like you're just, I mean, because it's a lot of water, it's a lot of feeling swollen. Is it super uncomfortable?
So I would recommend, like, I don't know, I would sort of equate it to like when you're doing, if you cut water for like a powerlifting meet or a fight, and then as you're rehydrating, especially if you have like 24-hour weigh-ins, so you're up like 10, 15 pounds. For lifting, it feels amazing. Like you fill out your belt really good. Your knee sleeves are nice and tight. You feel strong as shit. You're just like, I am all to this man. Blah. Just don't look at yourself in the mirror. That's the trick.
I think that's definitely more of like a guy's approach because I know as a girl, if my weight belt was
Yeah.
feeling really tight, my clothes are feeling tight, I'd be like so uncomfortable. That is not a good feeling for me.
It, oh, touching with you, what you touched on, Lexi, about making sure you stay with your coach a little bit post show. Look, life doesn't, here's the cold hard truth, life doesn't go back to normal directly after a show. And if it does, that is a one-way ticket to post show depression.
Yeah.
It's almost always going to happen. And that's just because you worked so hard, you had this end goal, you got to that goal, and then I'm not saying you blew it. That's not the way to take it. But then it's not like you're at the finish line and everything stops. It's not, because you're going to see your body change in ways that you're not going to like. And that's going to happen every single time. But if you're with your coach and you're still communicating with them, even if it happens, they can help explain why it happens. That is most of my conversations I have with check-ins post show is, I understand where you're at. I've been there. Don't beat yourself up about it. You're going to be okay. And helping coach them on the mental side through that. I'm telling you, because it's going to happen. Almost everyone I know has some degree of post show depression after it. I don't really know anyone that doesn't. But having a coach there that can help with that and help you with your reverse plan, it's really, really important.
It is.
Yeah, because you're going from this place where you said this is the best I've ever looked, it's the best I've ever done, like the best shape of my life, and whether that's healthy or not, all right, let's put that to the side. You're probably going to need to put some weight back on. You're going to need to do some stuff, but like that, there is a lot of mental anguish and like difficulty that comes from intentionally or even unintentionally knowing, like, okay, I'm now making progress away from that. Ugh. Like
Mm-hmm.
it's not like, so it definitely takes some massaging. Like you have to kind of change your mindset and ideal and like what you're going after and understand like there's seasons, and that stuff can be really difficult to manage on your own. um and then if you want to keep competing or you're a high level competitor, minimizing the amount of weight that you regain throughout that reverse and throughout that post show time also super important, because the more that you gain, if you're going to compete again, you're going to have to lose that again. So like I don't even like, I think reverse is like that's big ticket item. That's not a small stuff. That's a big stuff. You need to take that seriously. Not even just for if you want to compete again, but like making sure that you're in a place where you're still comfortable, confident in your body,
Yeah, for your
as
health,
well.
mental health.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Your health. Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, any last minute like thoughts you guys have on this topic before we wrap it up? I feel like it
Yeah.
was a good one.
I think one more thing I wanted to touch on that I heard John Jewett say, similar to what Stephen was saying about their seasons in there. And the hardest part about post show is you saw that number go down on the scale all the time, right? And you saw yourself getting tired. You saw that. A good way to frame it on a reverse is, don't fixate necessarily on the weight, fixate how you feel, how your digestion is, and how your training is. Are you getting stronger? Are you feeling good? Are your joints better? Is your mind getting clear? Is that brain fog going away? You can focus on other things other than that scale. And that's a big thing, because I get to where now I'll weigh myself a little bit post show, but like once I get past that, I won't for a minute. But I've also been doing this a long time and I understand what kind of impact it has. So I just kind of stay off of it. And then I get back into it, right? Because I don't want to see it go up quite like that. I don't, but I also know I'm doing what I need to do. And it's not like I don't weigh myself and I coach myself. But if I was coaching, if someone else was coaching me, I would absolutely be doing that. Right. But it's having another variable that you can track, if that's your type of personality, can be helpful, because you're still making progress. It's just a different type of progress.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's a good way to frame it. I love it. I love it.
Yeet AF.
Any last thoughts, Stephen?
No, I barely thought enough for this one.
Well, we enjoyed having you on, and I do know for those of you who are listening, we're going to try to get our mindset coach Danica on in a future episode here very soon too, to talk a little bit about like the mental health side of things, of competing, because I know last time we had her on about month or two ago with Evan and I, we got a lot of great feedback on that. So we are always open to any suggestions you guys have too when it comes to topics. So you can feel free to DM any of us. You can comment on the YouTube video if you want to hear us talk about anything in particular, or just want to comment, say hello, and let us know what you loved about this episode. That's cool too. So anyways, well, we will wrap this up here, and I hope you guys have a good rest of your day.
Peace.
Peace out.